Hello, my name is Walker Gaskins, and welcome to the All Things CFB show. This is episode 2. And we have a pretty jam packed show tonight. We're going to be talking about week 1 matchups, decision by the SEC, and also some reactions to some week 0 games. But firstly, subscribe, like the video, please share it with a friend. There's no commitment you have to make, it only helps me grow the channel. And of course, follow the socials. I do have a Twitter account where I provide relevant and up-to-date information on a daily basis. So please follow the socials, subscribe, it only helps me. But first, I want to do a reaction to Kansas State versus Iowa State. Now, for those who might have missed it or need a reminder, Iowa State beat Kansas State 24-21 in Ireland on Saturday. And I had predicted that to be a close game. However, the way the game played out was not what I expected whatsoever. Firstly, turnovers. Walker, how many turnovers could the team possibly have had? 2 fumbles for each team. And then you also include a muff punt by running back Dylan Edwards for Kansas State in the first quarter, who then left with an ankle injury. I mean, it was a pretty wild game. It was one of the more interesting games. I was on my toes the entire game. I do think the rain and the fireworks smoke did seem to play a big part. I didn't see that smoke dissipate from at least watching it at home from that point of view until like the second half started. So I do think it wasn't that just these teams can't protect the ball or have bad ball security. It was just I think the smoke and the rain both played a big factor into that. But to dive into the game a little bit, I said Kansas State would probably win if they dominated the trenches. Now, if I went and time traveled to last week before the game and told myself that Kansas State would have 4 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, and only allowed 130 rushing yards from a really good Iowa State running back room, including players such as Carson Hansen and Abasama III, on top of the fact that Kansas State offensive line only gave up 1 sack and had 110 yards on the ground despite losing their starting running back before the first offensive possession even began, I probably would have bet some money that Kansas State won that game. But despite all of this, despite how much Kansas State wreaked havoc in the backfield for Iowa State, the Wildcats still fell short, and Rocco Beck still managed to go for 183 yards and 2 touchdowns. I also said in my prediction segment earlier this week that I believe Rocco Beck was farther along than Avery Johnson as a quarterback, and I think it showed on Saturday. I mean, Avery Johnson did go 273 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, at face value, it looks like what I'm saying is ridiculous. But go back and watch the film on both of those plays. Both touchdowns were wide open receivers. The nearest defender for Iowa State was 10 yards behind him. I mean, on that second one, I believe, it was still a little bit short. The wide receiver had to slow down for it, but because he was so open, he was still able to snag it and get a touchdown. So the stats great. Avery Johnson didn't have a terrible game. I'm not going to say that. That would be ludicrous. But the stats are misleading. You look back at some of the tape, he was off on a lot of throws, wasn't in sync with some of his receivers, and he was throwing behind his tight end a lot. I mean, just some easy but needed pass plays that needed to be executed, and Avery Johnson wasn't able to do it in week 0. But overall, it was still a great game. It reflected the true chaos of Farmageddon. I love the Big 12. I think this game encapsulates the chaos we're going to see in the Big 12 this year. But keep in mind, these teams are both still an absolute threat to win the conference. All right, I mean, rain, fireworks, smoke, playing in a different country, week 0, a bitter rival. I mean, there's a lot of factors that played into this game other than just how good that both teams are. So hold off on your judgment. I certainly am for both teams until we see the first couple weeks of the regular season. But reacted to that, also wanted to shout out Kansas Jayhawks. Looked really sharp against the Fresno State. All right, Jalen Daniels has proved time and time again, including this game, that when he's healthy, he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12, if not the country. Right? And then also, of course, Hawaii with the crazy game against Stanford with their field goal kicker actually learned how to kick off of YouTube. He's from Tokyo, Japan. And he actually kicked the game-winning field goal. So that was a nice game to see. Saw Andrew Luck, which is a rare occurrence these days. But let's talk about the SEC real quickly. So for those who don't know, the SEC announced they're moving to a 9-conference game schedule in the 2026 season and on. And the SEC has only played 8 conference games since 1992, right? So on top of the fact that's one extra SEC game each team must play, they're also required to play, and I quote, a quality non-conference Power 4 opponent every year. I'll say that again. A quality non-conference Power 4 opponent every year. So Alabama, I don't think, is going to be able to schedule Purdue, right, as their non-conference opponent. Okay, Oklahoma isn't going to be able to go and schedule Oregon State. All right, no disrespect to those teams, but I believe what Greg Sankey meant by quality non-conference opponent is someone that a majority of the country, no matter what conference they're from or no matter what team they root for, could be like, all right, that's a good win, right? And a little going back into the SEC section of this decision, they'll have 3 annual opponents and 6 rotating opponents. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what teams will have to play who every single year. From what I heard, there will not be any divisions. I know there is 16 teams in the SEC, so some people theorize it could be 4 divisions of 4. However, Greg Sankey said it's still going to be just a wide open conference play. And they finally joined the Big 10 and Big 12 with a 9-conference game schedule. Those other 2 conferences already had it for quite a while now. But just an overview of that, but I want to give my personal thoughts on that. Firstly, I think this is a direct response to the College Football Playoff Committee's announcement on a bigger emphasis on strength of schedule. Look at last season. 9-3 Ole Miss, 9-3 Alabama, 9-3 South Carolina, missing out compared to a 10-2 Indiana, who was 0-2 against the top 25 teams they played, 0 wins over top 25 opponents. And then 11-2 SMU, who lost to BYU early and also lost to Clemson, which the South Carolina team went into the last game of the regular season and beat in Death Valley. So it's clear that the SEC believes their league is deeper, and they believe the fact that their league is so deep that each team, or the conference, basically cannibalizes itself at the tier 2 to high tier 3 level. I mean, the fact that the committee has said this, on top of the fact that the SEC is now making this move to a 9-conference game schedule, I think it's just a sign the SEC is putting the ball back into the Big Ten's court, saying, "Hey, we see how the CFP's committee is going to change their viewpoint on things. We know we have the deeper conference. For the past couple of years, your best teams may have beat our best teams, but as a conference, we are deeper. So what are you going to do about it now?" So, my next thought. The SEC is advocating for a 5+11 model for the college football playoff. The contract for this one is going to end, I believe, after this season. And you might be asking, 5+11, that's 16. Yes, you're right. The SEC wants a 16-team playoff. I personally thought 10 should have been the limit whenever we were talking about playoff expansion from the 4-team. I thought, you think top 25, top 20, top 10. You don't think top 12. Right? You think top 10 or top 5, right? So, but instead of complaining or sitting here and just saying, hey, go back to 10, it's clear that all trends are going towards probably a 16-team playoff. But the question is now, how is it going to be formatted? But back to my main point, the SEC is advocating for a 5+11 model, where the 5 conference champions are given a playoff spot and the 11 other seeds are at large. Now, obviously, this benefits the SEC if they get what they want, because think about it. Let's say Texas wins SEC this year. All right? I can guarantee if you have 11 other spots that are at large after the 4 other conference champions, Georgia should be able to make it. Alabama should be able to make it. South Carolina could make it. LSU could make it at the end of this season. A vast majority of the teams in the SEC could have a valid argument or be right on the bubble of a playoff now that you have 11 seeds that are at large. Now, this differentiates from the Big Ten's advocated AQ model, where each conference is guaranteed a certain amount of spots. So, for example, the Big Ten would have 4 guaranteed spots. No matter how the rankings sort out, they have 4 spots. SEC has 4, the ACC has 2, the Big 12 has 1, and then Group of 5 conferences also have 1. So it's very clear that both conferences and both commissioners for each conference are trying to play to the strengths of said conference. SEC may not have the best team in the country these past couple years, but they know they have a deeper conference. All right. However, the Big Ten is not as deep as the SEC by any way whatsoever, but their top teams, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, have proved to be better than the SEC's top, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, in the past 2 to 3 years. So it's all about what these conferences are doing, what's best for them. And honestly, I think it's going to be very interesting on how this shapes out. I think the SEC made a big move now. They put the ball back into the Big Ten's court, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting. Now let's talk Week 1. Whew, I am excited for Week 1. This is going to be a bunch of matchups. I'm only going through, I believe, 4 on the video for the sake of time. However, I will be posting on my X account some other predictions I have for games such as like the Thursday game, Boise State, Southern Florida, Auburn, Baylor, some other games like that are a little bit earlier or I may not mention here. So please go follow my account there, WG Sports, all things CFB. All right, and I'll definitely be providing you with my predictions for the other games on there. But the first game, I had to put this one at first. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Number 1 Texas at number 3 Ohio State. As of now, the Buckeyes are favored by 2.5 points. And this game is at noon for the big noon kickoff, which is ridiculous if you ask me. But I don't even want to talk about that. But arguably the biggest headline heading into the season when this game was announced was a Week 1 rematch of the college football playoff semifinals last season. So on one hand, you have 2 teams. One of them won the national championship. The other one was right there at the gate of playing in the national championship. All right? But you may be thinking, okay, this is going to be a game where both teams are going to be making 0 mistakes. It's going to be elite on elite. Which team's going to make just one small mistake more than the other team? Let me tell you the statistic. Both teams are in the 80s for returning production this year. They may be the 2 best rosters in the country, talent-wise, on paper, but in the 80s for returning for production. So expect some early mistakes, some rookie mistakes from some players, not because they're not talented, but because, if you do anything perfectly the first time, are you even human? Right? So they're definitely not the same teams from last year. However, I'm not arguing they're number 1 and number 3. They deserve exactly where they should be. But I'm saying don't expect a perfect game. Expect a game with, Week 1 jitters, just like Iowa State and Kansas State. But for each game, I am going to go over some keys for each team and then give my prediction. So we're going to start with the keys for the Texas Longhorns. First, Arch Manning needs to pan out early in this game. If you look at my top 10 quarterback rankings, which was in my last episode and also on my X account, I had him outside the top 10, strictly due to his lack of experience. I think if he's able to handle this Ohio State defense and the pressure of playing in the big house, of Week 1, of all the expectations on him from the offseason, if he's able to do this, he's easily in the top 10. All right? It's not that I don't want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but you never know. It's that one in a blue moon chance where Arch Manning doesn't pan out. But the second he proves it against Ohio State, I'll put him in the top 10. So Arch Manning obviously needs to settle in early. All right, it's going to be a hostile crowd. All right, it's going to be his first time really leading this offense in a game, especially a big game such as this. All right, he's played a little bit snaps here, snaps there in other big games last season. You saw that against Texas A&M, especially saw some of that. However, this is his first time having the full control for this offense, so it's going to be very interesting. Next question. How will the offensive line be against Ohio State's defensive line? You lose 4 of your starting offensive linemen, and you're tied in to the NFL draft. Just something to keep for thought. I'm not going to go over it too long, just something to think about. Next question. Will the secondary be able to stop Ohio State's wide receivers? You lose some major contributors. Andrew McCaba at safety, Jedi Barron at defensive back, both to the NFL. And I get Texas is one of the best defenses in the country, according to some people. All right, they have some studs in the secondary, but you can't not admit that losing that experience, losing that talent, losing that amount of snaps played on that defense is going to hurt. And I mean, you look at the Ohio State wide receiver room, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. That's the top two. You got a dozen guys behind them who will probably all start at most teams in the country. All right, you're going to have to see how that secondary is going to be able to contain the Ohio State defense, because it doesn't matter how well Arch Manning plays or if he doesn't get sacked a single time if Jeremiah Smith has 200 yards receiving. All right, now I don't think he's going to get 200 yards, but you get the point I'm trying to make. Right? We got to see how that secondary is going to be able to handle this wide receiver room, which went scorched earth in the playoffs and beat a lot of good teams last year. Just some notes for Texas real quick. They do lose Matthew Golden and Isaiah Ward at the wide receiver position, but they bring back Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore, who should be great. And the reason I say this is not only because of what I've heard out of fall camp and from just my belief in them as talented wide receivers, but also by the fact that offensive staff and Steve Sarkisian didn't bring in a single wide receiver from the portal last year. I think that shows a lot more than what people are looking at firsthand. I think that's something that speaks a lot about a team and a coaching staff's confidence in a certain position room. All right, so just watch out for those two wide receivers. And then, of course, you have to improve the special teams. All right, I mean, Burt Auburn was 16 for 25 last season on field goals. Okay, there was a lot of times where they could have closed games, such as against Arizona State where they couldn't. And luckily, Texas survived that, but just barely did they escape the Sun Devils. So they bring in freshman kicker Mason Shipley. I think he's the expected starter as of right now. Hopefully special teams get better, because in a game such as this where you're Texas, people look at you as the number one team in the country, you cannot be worrying about special teams. You need to have that down. Now, the keys for Ohio State. First, settle Julian Sayin early. I said the exact same thing about Arch Manning. I'll say the exact same thing here with Sayin. Now, the difference between them is Arch Manning has had to start a couple of games when Quinn Ewers was injured last year. And he also has more experience than this freshman quarterback. I expect Texas' defensive line to go after him all night. Make him uncomfortable. Wreak havoc in the backfield the best way you can. Because the more uncomfortable you make Sayin in his first start in college against a team such as Texas, that's the more mistakes he'll probably make, and that's more opportunities that the secondary can take to make turnovers and switch the tide of this game. So can Julian Sayin settle in? Can he drive down the field consistently in his first start for the Buckeyes and just for him in general in college? Next thing, focusing on Ohio State's defense here, you got to limit Texas's rushing attack. I mean, Ohio State needs to neutralize the Longhorns' ground game early, because Texas is not a team where, you let them have 200 yards rushing in the first half and all of a sudden you figured it out at halftime. No, if they get the ball rolling on you, they have it for the rest of the game. I mean, you look at the tri-headed backfield. You have Quintravion Wisner, who had over 1,000 rushing yards last season. C.J. Baxter, who was a freshman last year, a five-star prospect, expected to be great. Had a season-ending injury in the preseason last year, but he's back. Should see some significant playing time. And then, of course, you have Arch Manning. We've seen some clips from him that went viral last year. He can run the ball when needed too. But you look at that defensive line for the Buckeyes. Can they reload? I have no doubt Ohio State can recruit defensive linemen and develop them. But can they develop them enough to where they can reload instead of having a small rebuild? They lose Jack Sawyer, Ty Hamilton, Tyleek Williams, and J.T. Tuamalu to the NFL. 4 starters. 4 significant starters who made a lot of great plays. You might remember Jack Sawyer's scoop and score strip sack from the college football playoff semifinals against Texas, right? Can that defensive line reload rather than rebuild? Because even if it's a small rebuild where you figure it out by mid-September, it doesn't matter because you have Texas week 1. All right, you have the Texas running back room week 1, right? Last key for Ohio State, can the offensive line protect Sayin? They lose a starting left guard, left tackle, and center to the NFL. That's their entire left side of their offensive line. Now, Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill Jr., they're going to wreak havoc, or they're going to do their absolute best to wreak havoc in the backfield all season long for any team they're playing. And this is similar to LSU, which I mentioned in my top 25, my own preseason top 25 in the last episode. Just like LSU, doesn't matter how great your quarterback is, how great your tight end is, how good your running back room is, or you may have the best wide receiver room in the country. If your quarterback can't throw it to them without having to scramble or get sacked, then your wide receivers can't do anything, right? So if Texas can get to the quarterback, then it's going to be a long night for those receivers who are going to be frustrated, right? And for that Ohio State offense. But I promise you, if Texas can get to the quarterback, Penn State's is probably going to get to their quarterback. Michigan's going to be licking their lips. All right. Oregon is going to be ready too. All right. So this week 1 offensive line performance against the Texas Longhorns is going to be a big tell for the Buckeyes. Here's my prediction. I'd be surprised if it was a blowout. I think both teams are just too good. There's too much pressure on them and on both head coaches for them to get blown out in a game like this, even though it's at the Big House. I think there is some not question marks, but things we have to see to believe in game 1 with just people replacing a lot of talent that left to the NFL last year. But I think this game will be won by whoever can settle in first. And I think that will be Texas. I think they'll go into the Big House and make a name for themselves in the SEC early this year. Give me the Longhorns over the Buckeyes in week 1. Next game, South Carolina versus Virginia Tech. All right. Some context. This is the week 1 Aflac kickoff game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. South Carolina comes in with high expectations following last season, and they have the momentum and motivation to take the next step. 9-4, and despite a great record for Carolina historically, they barely missed the playoffs. They felt they were robbed against LSU. They felt that they shot themselves in the foot against Alabama, right? They felt they shot themselves in the foot against Illinois. It wasn't that we tried our best and we got this really good record. It was, we finished 9-4. There was so much more we could have done. We had so much more potential. So this team, Shane Beamer has said it multiple times, they're not looking to redo last season. They're looking to build upon it. So this is a motivated team, more motivated than I think a lot of people realize. And then you look on the other hand, Brent Pry and his program at Virginia Tech. Brent Pry needs a big win for this program. Virginia Tech fans, I don't think, have been satisfied with the performance of his teams in the past 3 years. 16-21 overall, right? So it's definitely, I feel more desperation for Brent Pry. I'm not saying he's desperate, but there's definitely more, you need this win, absolutely, when it comes to keeping your program alive and keeping your job as a head coach, right? And also right now, Gamecocks are currently favored 8 points. All right, it was 7.5, but with Rasul Faison being approved by the NCAA, it moved up to 8. We'll get to that in a minute. Now let's talk about the keys for South Carolina. First, you have to control the lines of scrimmage. First of all, your offensive line. They got better in the back half of the season. However, there are still some concerns for this offensive line. All right, the offensive line has never been a strength for Shane Beamer. While at South Carolina, it has been pretty pitiful sometimes. You could chalk it up to injury in some cases, but other times, it just wasn't a good offensive line. So first, you have to make sure you can protect Sellers, right? Because you can't go an entire season of him having to make clutch play after clutch play, especially now that he isn't sneaking up on anyone. All right, he's a Heisman contender. All right, people are going to be looking to game plan for his clutch ability, for his ability to scramble and get out of the pocket. So can the offensive line protect him? And the next, front seven run blocking. All right, you lose Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders, Boogie Huntley, Kyle Kennard, the best awarded the best defender in college football last year. You lose all 3 of your starting linebackers. All right, you lose Nicky Minwari, a safety, who was very good at helping assist the run when needed to and making tackles that needed to be made whenever they got through the first and second layer of that defense. All of them are gone. This defense loses a majority of their starters from last season. So can you block the run? Can you limit Kyron Drones' dual threat ability and his ability to scramble? Because if Kyron Drones is on his A game, it's going to be hard to beat him. All right, you've seen that in multiple games, such as the game against Miami last year. Kyron Drones at his A level is hard to beat. So I don't think this defense for South Carolina will take as far back of a step back as people think. But how big that step will determine, I think, be a big factor in what their record is when we look back at this 2025 season. Now, the next key, establishing the run. Speaking of running back, Rasul Faison finally got cleared by the NCAA after transferring from Utah State in January. I don't think it should have taken that long. However, I'm grateful the NCAA made a decision that I believe was objectively the right thing. Coming from a perspective, I'm not talking from a South Carolina fan perspective, strictly from a sports fan, a college football fan, I think it was the right thing to do. All right? But even take away, let's say even if Rasul Faison wasn't cleared, okay? Beamer said last week, and I think this reflects this attitude from this fan base and from this team, that this running back room is deeper than years past. Even last year. No knock on Rocket Sanders. I mean, he was a great running back. But looking at the room in total, it's much more deeper. It's not, if Rocket Sanders isn't in the game, we're taking a little bit of a step back. I mean, if Rasul Faison isn't playing, you got Oscar Attaway. You got Isaiah Augustave, who transferred in from Colorado. You got Matthew Fuller and Jawarn Hollow, both some young guys who are looking to make a name for themselves and are only getting better as they develop more and more. I expect all of these guys to get some snaps within the season. These are some good running backs, and this is an underrated running back room, not only in the SEC, but I think in the country. And of course, if you establish the run, you open up the pass game. All right, you got a new but talented wide receiver core. Nick Harbor, Jared Brown, and Mazeo Bennett Jr. obviously return. They look to build upon their last season. But also you have a lot of freshmen, Malik Clark, Lex Cyrus. Two names I want y'all to pay attention to here, Donovan Murph and Brian Rowe, who from what I've heard out of fall camp are making a lot of headway and should be some guys who you might see against Virginia Tech, despite the fact that they're just being freshmen and Donovan Murph only got here at the summer. He missed spring practice, right? So I think all of those tie in together. If you can establish the run game, you open up the pass, all right? If you can do both of those, it's pretty clear Sellers is having time in the pocket. And then my last thing, it's not more so any position. It's just how this team performs. And it's, can South Carolina come out strong? Look at last year. This is a 9-4 team that a lot of teams in the playoff, if South Carolina made the playoffs and Tennessee, Ohio State, Penn State were like, shoot, we got to play South Carolina. That was the attitude looking at the Gamecocks at the end of the season. Now look at the beginning of the season last year. They barely beat Old Dominion at home. They only won 23-19. They were down in the fourth quarter. They lost to North Carolina in 2023. They only won by, I believe, 2 touchdowns against Georgia State the year before that. So not only is this one of the rare occasions in South Carolina history where we have high expectations going into a season, but this is a motivated Virginia Tech team, I believe, that wants to make a name for themselves, that wants a big win, and thinks South Carolina is the perfect chance to do that in week 1. So can Beamer change this, not tendency, but this trend to start out slow? Can they start out stronger? Because if they don't, then that could be a sudden situation where going into halftime it's 21-17 South Carolina or 17-17 going into halftime, right? Now the keys for Virginia Tech. First, you have to limit Lenore Sellers' dual threat ability. Sellers is 6'3", 240 pounds. That's a big guy. 18 broken tackles against Clemson. Should have been sacked at least 5 times against Texas A&M. Broke every one of them. And ran for 106 yards and a touchdown against Texas A&M. And I want to mention something real quick. Lenore Sellers is an underrated passer. A lot of people are saying he's just a running back. He's just like Lamar Jackson. They're both just running backs. You don't know ball. I'm sorry. But if you limit his rushing ability, it puts more pressure on Sellers, not because he's a bad passer. This guy was graded as one of the best. Had one of the best deep balls last season in 2024. but it's not his style to be a pocket passer. That's my whole point. And if you limit his ability to scramble or limit his design run plays, right, that puts a lot more pressure on him to be a pocket quarterback, which despite Mike Shula working on that with him in the offseason this year, it's something that you can't get out of someone whenever it's been their style their whole lifetime in the span of one offseason, right? So limit Lenore Seller's dual threat ability, make him a pocket passer. Next thing, can the wide receivers get open? Now you might be asking, who's their number one wide receiver and returning production? The guy's name's Aiden Green. You want to know his stats? 19 receptions, 268 yards last season. This is a more unproven wide receiver room than South Carolina. But the difference is, no disrespect to Virginia Tech secondary, but this is a different tier of a secondary that Virginia Tech is having to go up against compared to South Carolina's wide receivers. All right. So let me name some guys on South Carolina's secondary. DQ Smith, fourth-year senior. Jalen Kogor, a nickel who was a freshman All-American, preseason second-team All-American. This is his junior year. Judge Collier, Brandon Sisse, a transfer from NC State who's going to be, almost a guaranteed, unofficially starter at cornerback. All right. You have Vakari Swain. All right. You have Peyton Williams. This is a deep secondary that is a strength for this defense heading into 2025. And then my prediction for the game, I think Virginia Tech will come out hot. I think South Carolina has that tendency to start a little slow. I don't think it'll be this whole game where they'll be a little funky. I think it might be the first half. I expected for South Carolina fans to be sweating a little bit going into halftime, but I don't think Virginia Tech has the depth or specifically the talent in a lot of the skill positions to compete with South Carolina for 4 quarters. I see the Gamecocks winning by 2 or more possessions. All right, I think it's going to be a good game, but I think the depth will start to show whenever the Gamecocks take over in the third and fourth quarter. Next game, arguably the biggest game, some would say, despite the fact that it's lower rankings for both teams compared to Texas and Ohio State. It's the battle of Death Valley. It's the battle of who's the real Tigers. Number 9 LSU goes into Memorial Stadium against number 4 Clemson Tigers. It's a 7:30 night game. And as of now, most sites have Clemson favored by 4.5. Seems close. Excuse me. You look at a couple weeks ago, it was 2.5 originally. So it has swung a little bit in Clemson's favor, even though it was already in the Clemson Tigers' favor. It swung a little bit more that way, which I think reflects this feeling from people who aren't LSU fans or Clemson fans, who aren't thinking it as I just want my conference to win. That the closer we get to this game, a lot of people are getting less confident about LSU. But just some overview for each team real quick. Dabo Swinney's looking to have another year similar to the Trevor Lawrence days in the late 2010s. All right, the staff, Swinney himself, this fan base believe they are the most talented at almost every level since those championship caliber teams. And I've never been someone to talk big on Clemson, but I think if a Clemson fan had any year to say this about being close to those Trevor Lawrence teams, I think this is the year. Look at LSU, however. They've lost the last 5 of their openers. All right. Brian Kelly's looking to change this narrative about LSU early in the season. You saw it at SEC Media Days. You see it in fall camp. They want to win week 1. They're not thinking just, it's another opponent. They want it, and they want it bad. And after the past 2 years with Brian Kelly, with losing those week 1 openers, and with poor defensive performance, many are looking to this game as a tell on how this season will go. And this is obviously a huge game for both programs. Each team could possibly lose 1 to 3 games in the season, depending on who catches them. That's why we play the games to see. So this could be a statement win or a statement loss that could keep or kick out a team from the college football playoff. So this is a big game for their resumes as well as their respective conferences. Keys for the LSU Tigers. Firstly, that offensive line. In my last episode, I talked about their offensive talent, but it doesn't matter how great they are if at the skill positions if they cannot withstand Clemson's defensive line. They lose 3 of their starters to the NFL on the offensive line, and also their tight end, Mason Taylor. And I hate to say it, but Nussmeier has proved to play worse when he's consistently under pressure. So you lose the fact that LSU offensive line has been gutted from players leaving to the NFL, and the fact you saw Nussmeier play how he did when he's under pressure a lot more. If this offensive line doesn't give Nussmeier time to be in sync with his talented wide receiver core and go through his progressions, then I think it's very concerning. It's going to be a long game for LSU fans. And just genuinely, when I'm talking about LSU in week 1, I don't care what the score of the game is. Clemson could win 35-21. LSU could win 21-17. Clemson could win 45-24. All right? Both teams are great teams. All right? 2 of the best teams in the country. One of them has to lose, right? Both of them can't win. I'm just looking at how this offensive line performs. If this offensive line gives up 6 sacks, all right, Garrett Nussmeier has to throw 2 picks. He's in pressure. You get a forced fumble in the backfield, all right? Even if they somehow won that game with those type of stats, that's a concerning look, all right? Because you can't have that type of performance and still win every single game. And I promise you, if Clemson can wreak havoc on LSU's backfield, so can Alabama, so can Texas A&M, so can South Carolina and Dylan Stewart, and a lot of teams can give LSU some problems if their offensive line isn't fixed. The next key, can the secondary take the next step? It's the second year under defensive coordinator Blake Baker. And just for a stat here, last season they allowed 231 passing yards per game on average. That's in the 70s nationally. You combine that with the fact that Cade Klubnik is one of the top quarterbacks nationally when it comes to 20-plus yard throws, with great wide receivers who can stretch the field and make the contested catches. I mean, even though Clemson lost the game against South Carolina last year, look at some of those deep balls that Klubnik threw, that those receivers grabbed. I mean, I was incredulous when looking at it. Just how did they catch that? Those receivers have that ability. Cade Klubnik has that deep ball accuracy and ability to chuck it down the field. If the secondary can't take the next step and fix this issue, look for it to be a long night for LSU fans on the defensive side of the ball as well. Now the keys for Clemson. First, I think this is almost an obvious one for Clemson fans. You got to dominate the trenches. You look at LSU's offensive line, and then you look at your defensive line. Experienced, talented, and arguably probably the best in the nation. TJ Parker, Will Helt, who transferred from Purdue, Peter Woods, DeMonte Capehart, and that's just naming a few. All right, so that defensive line, I think it should be a given. The expectation is that defensive line should be able to dominate LSU's offensive line. And then, but we'll talk about Clemson's O-line for a second. They returned 3 starters from last season. And despite the fact that LSU's front 7 on defense isn't being talked enough compared to Clemson's defensive front 7, this is still an SEC team, right? I mean, the SEC obviously recruits well. They have big guys up in the trenches, right? They wouldn't be the SEC we know if they didn't. So, can this offense flow down the field? Can Cade Klubnik have time to read through his progressions, go through the motions? Because we've seen sometimes where, he doesn't have full time to read through his progressions. He gets a little off, overthrows a receiver, makes a bad read, does something like that. So can this offensive line keep this talented offensive unit flowing down the field in sync in time? And then the next thing for Clemson, you got to establish the run game. All right. Clemson is one of the best wide receiver trios in the nation. Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco Jr., TJ Moore. But their passing attack won't be as effective if they can't run the ball. All right. About a week ago, Dabo Swinney announced that their running back, Adam Randall, who's a senior, is going to be the starter for Clemson week 1. Now, just some context, he transitioned from wide receiver during the offseason to becoming the starting running back. Reminds me of DeCarrion Joyner from South Carolina about 2 years ago. Okay, and then backing up Randall will be freshman Gideon Davidson, who I've heard a lot of buzz from fall camp. And I expect, despite the fact he's not the starter, he's going to see some significant snaps, especially as the season goes on. All right, and if this just the fact that you have a running back who's transitioning in from wide receiver, and you have a freshman running back who's just getting used to the college game, it's a little bit of a concern for Clemson, because if they can't run the ball well, LSU's defense may have a secondary that could get scorched by every single one of those wide receivers and their backups. But if you can't run the ball right, and LSU only has to put 5 in the box to stop the run, then your offense becomes pretty one-dimensional. And I will say it's much easier for a secondary to defend against the pass when they expect the pass every single time, where you can't run the ball and make it a 2nd and 6, where you could run again or make a pass compared to 3rd and 12, right? So can this offense have a balanced attack? Running back doesn't. The running game doesn't have to have 200-plus yards, right? But they have enough to open up the talented wide receivers at their disposal, right? But predicting this game, I think Brian Kelly really needs a win for this program, but I just don't think it will be this year. I see too many concerns for LSU that Clemson can exploit for me to be able to comfortably, or even just somewhat comfortably, pick LSU, right? It's not that I just dislike LSU. It's just I see too many concerns that Clemson can attack. So I think Clemson takes the name of Death Valley, takes the name of the Tigers, and they win by at least 7, if not maybe just a little bit more. And then for our last prediction, we have number 6 Notre Dame playing at number 10 Miami Sunday night. 7:30 p.m., Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida. Right? As of now, Notre Dame is favored by 2.5 against Miami. All right? So just there's some context, but let's talk about both teams real quickly, just as a program. Marcus Freeman is looking to make another deep run in the playoffs. All right? Now, a lot of people may think that Notre Dame was a Cinderella story, especially after they lost to Northern Illinois, right? But Marcus Freeman wants to make it clear, hey, this wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't like a TCU from a couple years back, right? We're going to consistently be here. We want to be a team that you're going to have to look out for every single season, one that's on your bulletin board every single offseason. So they're not satisfied with the loss in the national championship. They think they can take the next step, and they think they have no reason not to. And then, of course, you look at Miami. They fell short last season of their playoff hopes. Those 2 losses to Georgia Tech and Syracuse kept them out the ACC championship game, right? And they were just the pinnacle of their defensive struggles, all right? And it wasn't that just this defense just had a bad game against those 2 teams, and that's why they lost. The defense was this bad the entire season. But it finally caught up to them against Georgia Tech and against Syracuse. And, of course, you also saw the defensive performance against Iowa State in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Now some keys for Notre Dame. First, quarterback play. C.J. Carr was announced as the starter for Week 1, but how experienced is he? Redshirted as a freshman last season. He only has 1 appearance in a game. And you might be asking, okay, how many pass attempts has he made in college? 10? 50? 100? The answer is 0. 0 pass attempts in college in a game. They're one of the many major teams with a new quarterback. So the question is, how many mistakes will this young quarterback make? He may be a very talented guy. I think he's a good quarterback. Otherwise, he wouldn't be at Notre Dame, right? But he's bound to make some of those first-timer mistakes. Everyone goes through it, right? In a game, especially as big as this quarterback position can be an advantage or disadvantage. So how quickly can Carr get settled in? How clean of a game will be able to play? That's going to be something to watch out for. And then, of course, you want to win in the trenches. That's the next key for the Fighting Irish. They have 5 players returning on their offensive line, 3 who were the main starters last season. And looking back to 2024, their offensive line was seen as a weakness for a long time. They had a lot of injuries. Just people were doubting them. Until the college football playoff games against Georgia and Penn State, where they proved not only was it a weakness, it was a strength, despite their many injuries, despite the doubt. So Marcus Freeman and this offensive staff are looking to not only replace the talent that's coming back, or that replace the talent that left, but also say, that wasn't a peak for us. That's going to be the standard of the Fighting Irish offensive line, year in and year out. So can this offensive line block for Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price? I think that's one of the best running back rooms in the country. I think Jeremiah Love is a top 3 running back in college football. If you told me you think he was the best, I wouldn't argue with you. So can the offensive line block for him? And can they keep C.J. Carr comfortable? Because if this is your first game starting in college, right? Your first time you'll have pass attempts in college. You're at Hard Rock Stadium. Miami's probably going to be going nuts. All right. All right, that fan base is passionate, especially after how high they finished last season. All right, and where Cristobal has gotten them over the past couple years. Can they keep C.J. Carr comfortable? Can this defensive line get to Carson Beck and force him to make bad decisions? All right, Miami's offensive line is big. They're an average of 320 pounds per player. All right, and they're looking to improve on some of their pass blocking issues from last season. So can this defensive line make pressure on Carson Beck? Who's also shown times where he can get pressured into bad decisions. All right, can this offensive line run block and keep C.J. Carr comfortable? That's going to be a big key, the trenches for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And then you have your keys for Miami. First thing, I just mentioned him just a second ago, quarterback cohesion. Carson Beck. Last year, Miami had Cam Ward, number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, right? Best quarterback in the country last year. But they bring in transfer Carson Beck from Georgia, all right? But Carson Beck was injured at the end of, near the end of the playoffs, right? And he missed the entire spring practice and a majority of the offseason with that injury. But he did start working out in the summer and throwing over the summer. And he's completely expected to be good to go for week 1. Right, unless something else happens or he takes a setback in his recovery process, which, as far as I know, hasn't happened, he's going to be ready for week 1. But the thing is, Beck comes to a team that lost its top 6 receivers from 2024. You might know Xavier Restrepo, all right, but the 5 guys after him are also gone. But they do bring in players such as Isaiah Horton from Alabama, so that kind of puts a Band-Aid on the big gash just a little bit. Right, so how quickly will this offense be able to gel, especially in a real game environment? How quickly will they be able to settle into the game? That's going to be a big thing to look at for Miami in week 1. And then, of course, Miami's defense. Last season, they allowed on average 27 points per game, 70th in the nation. And you look at their 3 losses, they allowed 38 points per game from the other team. Cristobal brings in Corey Heatherman at defensive coordinator this offseason. Wanted a new change in that defensive coaching staff, and he looks to not only retool but re-identify this defense heading into 2025. Now, of course, up front, you've got players such as Reuben Bain Jr., all right, that will bring disruption up in the front, that will try to get to C.J. Carr. But the true test will be to see how the secondary will be able to handle Notre Dame's notable wide receivers such as Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison, right? So here's my prediction. I trust Miami at the quarterback spot, especially with the lack of experience for C.J. Carr. Okay, I look at the lines of scrimmage, and I think this defense, despite its past struggles, will come in rejuvenated with a new coaching staff, a new defensive coordinator, and be able to capitalize off of some of, I think, the expected mistakes of a quarterback who's playing his first college game. Right, and I also like the offensive line. All right, I've heard a lot of good things coming from Miami during fall camp about their offensive line, and I just think they're bigger up there, bigger, motivated, and very talented. So I know this isn't probably the most popular opinion, but give me the Miami Hurricanes to upset the Fighting Irish. So you look at the games, I've had Miami as predicted winner, Clemson over LSU, all right, South Carolina over Virginia Tech, and then, of course, Texas over Ohio State. I will be posting some other game predictions before Thursday because that's when, the 5-day straight of football starts, right? So go check out my X account, WG Sports, all things CFB. Please follow me. I provide updated and relevant information. And then please subscribe. Please like the video. Please share it with a friend who loves football as much as me and you do. All right? There's no commitment. Right? There's nothing negative that could happen whatsoever. It only helps me grow the channel, and it only helps me further build so I can bring more videos such as this. So with that being said, thank you. I'm excited for week 1. I think you are too. And it's going to be a great day. So God bless.